Why do so many capable women never reach executive leadership? Welcome to another episode of Empower with Nancy. And today I want to have just really a deep conversation with you. And this may feel uncomfortable. I want you to be honest with yourself because I'm going to be hitting a lot of different pain points because I've experienced this. So, what I'm going to be sharing with you is over several decades of my leadership executive type of business that I have been in. What I'm about to say goes against everything that we have been taught about success. Some of the most capable women I know will never become executives. Not to say that you're probably saying, well, Nancy, how the hell can you even say that? But hear me out. I want you to just really think about this for a moment because they won't become executives because they're not smart enough, right? Not because they're not experienced enough, not because they don't work hard enough, not because they don't care. In fact, they're usually the hardest damn working women in the company, period, the end. So there are women that people constantly depend on. There are women that are very trusted. There are women that everyone calls when something goes wrong. And ironically, what happens? That's exactly why they stay stuck. They lose their identity. They're constantly working. They're constantly the go to person. They're constantly fixing things. And I know that's not what most leadership experts tell you, right? And I am going to be brutally honest with you and tell you what I have experienced. And like I said, after 3 decades of leading teams, sitting in executive meetings, scared shitless. Sometimes I wanted to cry in an executive meeting and held it all together and left and cried. I mean, let me tell you, I've been chewed up and spit out numerous times, but I'm very grateful that I was because I wouldn't be where I'm at today. I've been in meetings making hiring decisions, promoting leaders, coaching executives, and then watching careers literally unfold right in front of my eyes. And then we're saying, like, how the hell can this happen? Again, I'm going to go back with your own identity. I've seen the patterns over and over and over again where people just don't understand what is in front of them. They don't understand and acknowledge the patterns that they see because they are so focused on working their asses off and they don't recognize it. The woman everyone says that they can't live without, right? Often becomes the woman they can't imagine promoting. Why? Because they do it all. And because if you remove them from doing it all, what happens? They feel that everything is going to crumble down. Sometimes you feel that they're not replaceable, but nobody talks about that, right? Does this sound familiar? Does this make sense to you? Does it sound like completely unfair? But guess what? It's also the truth. So let me explain something to you. I want you to think about the person in your company who solves everything, the person who knows all the answers, the person who catches mistakes before anybody else sees them, the person who literally just jumps in whenever there is crisis or a major challenge, the person who works extremely late, the person who never says no, right? The person who carries more responsibility than anyone actually realizes. but maybe that person is you. Now, let me ask you a question about that. What happens if that person gets promoted? Who does all the work that they are doing right now? Who does it? So, this is where many capable women unknowledgeably, like, right, they don't know what they had created, because they are so valuable doing the work that nobody sees them as what? No one sees them as leading the work. No one sees them as leaders. No one sees that they're including themselves. They'll come back and say, I want you to go back and look at and try to solve the problem. They become so valuable doing the work that nobody sees them as leading the work. Does that make sense? They become so valuable doing the work that nobody sees them as leading the work, including themselves, right? I can't tell you how many women that I've coached who have said certain things like, Nancy, I don't understand it. I've trained everyone. I know everything. I work super hard. I've been here longer than anybody else. I know more than the person who just got freaking promoted. I've proven myself. And every single time I hear that, and I know exactly what happens. They're trying to earn leadership through what? Performance, right? And then that means that when they're trying to earn leadership through performance, sometimes we're not confident in ourselves. But leadership isn't about that you earn through performance in itself. Does it help? Absolutely. Leadership is earned through influence. The higher you go in an organization, the less people care about how much work you do. And the more they care about what kind of results that you create through other people, that's a hard truth, especially for women. Because many of us were taught that if we work hard enough, eventually someone will notice. They'll notice the working hard, stay humble, keep your head down, be grateful, wait for your turn, and wait for your turn, and wait for your turn. But if your turn never comes, what happens? What if nobody notices? What if you've spent 10 years proving you're reliable when what you really needed to do is demonstrate the leadership? And this is where I see women get trapped and stuck. And they keep doing more and more and more. They're taking on more, they're fixing more, they're saving more, they're giving more, right? Because they feel that, oh my gosh, I just got passed. I didn't get promoted. Why? And then they feel stuck. And then they start losing confidence. And then they think they're not enough. And then they don't know what to do. And then they think, oh, you know what? I'm going to leave this place. They don't care. But ultimately, you're not looking within yourself. So thinking that eventually all of the efforts will lead to an opportunity that they've been waiting for. And then one day they wake up extremely exhausted, not because they're incapable, because they're carrying more responsibilities on top of responsibilities that no longer serve the future that they're trying to create into getting that leadership position. The woman who eventually becomes an executive, right? And it's not the shift that most people think. They don't become smarter. They don't suddenly become more confident. They don't magically stop doubting themselves. They stop trying to prove themselves and they start positioning themselves. That's different. They start speaking up before they feel ready. They stop being the answer to every freaking problem. They develop for others. That's what they do. They think strategically. They create visibility. They stop waiting to be chosen and they choose themselves. This is where the identity comes into play. This is where the confidence comes into play. Now, before we really end this podcast, I want you to ask yourself something. That what if the thing that keeps you from your next level isn't a lack of capability? What it's the fact that you are tied to your own value to being needed. Because here's what I've learned over the years. Many women don't admit that they are not confident enough. It doesn't matter if they're the go-to person. They feel that they have to be the go-to person to get recognized. They need to recognize their own self-worth with themselves, not with everyone depending on you. And leadership requires you to let go of that. Leadership requires you to stop being needed for every decision, every problem, every fire, every answer. Because the more that you are the go-to person, guess what happens? When you are a leader, and when you become a leader, okay, when you are a leader, when people constantly go to you, like when people come to me all the time, right? When in corporate America and people come to me, even people still come to me, I am not just going to automatically give the answer. I'm not going to step in and do it. Sometimes as leaders, we feel like it's not being done right. It's not being done the way you want it to be done. You'll just do it yourself to make it faster because you're too busy as a leader. You don't have time to train. And what it is people constantly go to you and then you are just answering the question instead of asking them, what would you do? What do you think? Let them think, because the more they go to you for the answer, you're enabling them to think for themselves, to think outside the box. You need to push them to make sure that they learn on their own. I remember when I started in the mortgage industry, and I started as a receptionist and worked my way. I kid you not, I worked every position. Started as a receptionist, then I went into a loan officer assistant. Then I went into a junior processor. Then I started being processing. Then I went into, drawing docs, doing closing docs, doing funding. Then I ended up being an underwriter. Like I worked in every position, secondary marketing, all like climbed my way up to the highest level as the COO of a company. But a lot of it I had to teach myself. A lot of it was just like, here, you figure it out. They didn't even have Google back then. You had to figure it out because they did not give you the keys to the castle. There was no AI. There was no, like I said, Google. You had to figure it out on your own. But damn, I have to tell you, back then I hated those days because I felt it was so hard. Like, how in the hell am I going to get through all of this? But it was like tough love. And I was able to get through it. And that is what made me a really, really, really good leader. Am I perfect? Absolutely not. Nobody's perfect, right? Leadership requires you to stop being needed for every darn decision. I'm just going to keep saying that. Leadership requires you to build people who no longer need you as much as you are used to. And it doesn't mean because you are not needed, that you're not valuable, that you feel like you're going to be replaceable, that you're not good enough, that you're not a good leader, you don't know what you're doing. Leaders don't know everything, right? So don't beat yourself up over it. But you need to acknowledge is who are your employees? You need to know if they're having a good, bad, or ugly day. You need to understand the triggers. You need to understand the root causes of things. Like when you analyze those things, you'll be able to pull out what is the most common denominator of all of your employees, right? When you're a leader, you are a coach and a mentor. You are a coach and a mentor. So figure out what are the pain points of each individual. Do a SWOT. What is each individual's strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? Look that over. You will see the patterns. And then you can look at all of your staff within your department, your staff, the people. And then you're going to look and say, okay, you're going to pull something out from each SWOT. And then you're going to put the puzzle together. And then that is what's going to help you position and pivot what you need to do as a leader. And sometimes it's terrifying for some people because if you're no longer needed, who are you? And that is the real question. Not whether you're capable, not whether you're qualified, not whether you're ready. Who are you when your value is no longer tied to being indispensable? Okay? That is super important because the question changes absolutely everything. So before we wrap this episode up, I want you to think about this. If nobody ever gave you another title, if nobody ever gave you another promotion, if nobody ever validated your potential, would you still see yourself as a leader? Because leadership isn't a title. It's not a position. It's not a promotion. It is an identity. And the women who ultimately reach executive leaderships are usually the women who decide that they are leaders long before it is confirmed. So, if you're listening to this and you've been waiting for the recognition, waiting for the confidence, waiting for the damn permission, waiting for someone to finally see your potential, maybe it's time to stop waiting. Maybe it's time to stop proving to everybody to get that promotion. Maybe it's time to stop asking for permission. Stop it. And maybe it's time to start leading from the place that you've been trying so hard to earn. Because the truth is, the leadership table isn't full of the most capable women. It's full of the women who were willing to be seen. Thank you so much for listening to another episode. And always remember that you have full control of the will. The goal was never to become indispensable. The goal was to become influential. the difference. Know your identity. Know your worth. Love yourself. Never give up. And remember that you always have full control of the will and that you can make a difference in your life. Nobody else can but you. Thank you so very much. Much hugs, Nancy.